Good morning. I am State Inspector General Lucy Lang. Thank you all for being with us this morning. I'm honored to be joined by Karen Murtaugh from Prisoners Legal Services of New York and Bianca Tylek from Worth Rises. Thank you to them and to all of us for joining us this morning. Today I'm announcing the results of a comprehensive multi-year investigation into the New York State Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, or DOCS, incarcerated individual drug testing program, which unjustly penalized hundreds of New Yorkers on the basis of improperly administered drug tests in state prisons. Although the mounting public health crisis of substance misuse sadly extends behind bars, it by no means justifies the ultimately arbitrary penalties imposed on already vulnerable community members in our state facilities. Our investigation revealed that for 8 months in 2019, failures by DOCS and its drug testing vendor, Microgenics Corporation, led to rampant false positive drug test results. In violation of proper state procurement practices, DOCS contracted with and began using Microgenics urine tests in January of 2019 to test for a variety of drugs, including the opioid buprenorphine. The manufacturer instructions clearly indicated that these tests are only designed to provide preliminary results and that any positive results should be verified using a second, more sensitive method. Instead of implementing this safeguard against false positive results prior to beginning use of the testing program, the supervisor of the testing program from DOCS, in collaboration with the sales representative from Microgenics, promulgated policies that did not require confirmation. And this was done without proper legal or scientific review. As soon as DOCS began using the Microgenics test, they saw a spike in positive tests. Our review of internal research documents from Microgenics later revealed that the presence of over-the-counter medications, including, for example, an antacid or even a natural sweetener used as a sugar substitute, could potentially produce false positives, all of which would have been revealed by a proper, more sensitive confirmatory test. Even after DOCS received a significant number of complaints of false positives, including from long incarcerated individuals who had never before tested positive for illegal drugs, DOCS took no steps to seek outside confirmation of the test results, and instead used what should properly have been only considered preliminary results as the basis to punish hundreds of incarcerated New Yorkers. The sanctions imposed included solitary confinement, lengthened sentences, delayed parole hearings, revoked family visitation, and other punishments. More than 1,600 incarcerated people were punished, including 140 who were subjected to solitary confinement. In August of 2019, after complaints were received from incarcerated people across the state, as well as from Prisoner Legal Services of New York, DOCS provided Microgenics with 6 positive samples to be tested by outside labs and sent 6 other positive samples directly to a third independent lab. 9 of these 12 samples were found to be false positives. Finally, after receiving this information, DOCS brought the matter to the attention of our office, for which I thank them. Following our subsequent investigation, and at our recommendation, 2,500 disciplinary records were expunged, lost privileges were reinstated, and DOCS ended the use of solitary confinement as a sanction for positive drug tests. While DOCS has terminated its contract with Microgenics and reformed its drug testing program, this stands as a heartbreaking example of how the absence of transparency can undermine due process and basic human rights, undermining the very integrity of state government. During our investigation, my office and I learned directly about the devastating consequences of these failures from brave New Yorkers who stood up for themselves and their loved ones under circumstances when the whole system seemed stacked against them. Now I'm honored to share remarks submitted by a woman who we will call J, and by her mother, who we will call L, Their harrowing personal experiences are some of the many that form the basis for the investigation that brings us here. These are the words of Jay. I was serving my sentence at Lakeview Shock, a minimum security facility in Western New York. I was working hard to complete my sentence and move on with my life. In August of 2019, I was informed that I tested positive for synthetic marijuana via a urine test. I had never used this substance. This test, provided by Dox and Microgenics, was wrong. It was a false positive. At this time, I was working hard to complete my sentence and get out in time to meet my grandchild, due in February of 2020. Instead, I was dealt this unfair blow that jeopardized my release and reentry. This test result and the following weeks were terrifying. Because of this positive result, I was isolated, not just physically, but also emotionally. I was alone. No one wanted to talk to me. I was afraid to eat the meals there. Were they contaminated? I wasn't allowed any visits. I lost recreation time. I couldn't receive packages. I couldn't even use the phone. I went to bed every night after that, thinking that the next morning I was going to be sent to solitary. It was a constant state of fear and isolation, all for something I did not do. I even stopped taking my medication and stopped eating anything that wasn't prepackaged in fear that it might trigger a false positive. While I was never sent to solitary confinement, my other worst fear came true. I was removed from the shock program and sent to Albion Correctional Facility, an all-female, medium security facility between Buffalo and Rochester. I'd been on track to get out in 6 months after successfully completing the shock program. Instead, I was now in another facility, unable to have visitors, and I missed the birth of my grandchild on February 14th of 2020. After Dox realized they had a problem with the drug tests, they wanted to send me back to shock to finish the program, but without crediting me the time I'd already served. It was an insult on top of an insult. I was following the rules, working to complete the shock program. They took that away from me. Because of Dox and Microgenics testing failures, I remained incarcerated until September of 2020. Thankfully, the Inspector General's office have thoroughly uncovered what went wrong and identified ways to fix Dox testing program. All of New York State's incarcerated individuals are paying their debt to society. It is unfair for Dox to add to that debt through a faulty drug testing program. It must be fixed. Those are the words of Jay in her own words. And we learned how much this failure affected not just incarcerated people, but their families. And so also with her permission, I'd like to share remarks from Jay's mother, Elle. In her words, we were all looking forward to Jay coming home and starting fresh. Our family was growing, and Jay needed to be here to be a part of it. Because of this false positive drug test, our world was turned upside down, and we were in the dark. We didn't know what Jay was going through, where she would be sent, or when she would get out. We went to visit her, but were turned away with no explanation. She missed the birth of her grandchild on February 14th, 2020. I was here waiting for her and trying to help her in any way I could, but there wasn't much I could do to help my daughter. When Jay was finally released in September of 2020, she got a job and began moving on with her life. Jay is doing great. We're glad to be a reunited family again, but it didn't have to be this way. The drug testing program at Dox must change. We're thankful to the State Inspector General and the team who worked so hard to shine a light on this awful practice. I'm so grateful to Jay and Elle and the many, many others who shared their traumatic experience with us in our work to uncover what was done wrong here. I hope that their courage is a model to other New Yorkers, that the Office of the Inspector General is here to receive your complaints about corruption, fraud, and misconduct in state government. I can assure you that complaints to the Office of the State Inspector General will be treated with the dignity they deserve by the committed members of the office. And to that end, I'd like to extend real gratitude to the team who handled this investigation. Acting Deputy Inspector General for the Upstate Regional Office, George Franey, who is with me today. Jim Davis, who oversaw the investigation, Chief of Investigations for the Upstate Regional Office, Sherry Amaral, Director of Audit for the Upstate Regional Office, Dennis Graves, and investigator Carmen Frangella. These public servants, when presented with this issue by docs, did not just seek to confirm that there was a problem with the administration of the microgenics tests, but they did what this office does best, a comprehensive investigation to uncover what happened, how it happened, and what docs needed to do to make sure that it never happens again. They did it by interviewing over 40 people, including doc staff, incarcerated people, families, toxicologists, microgenics representatives, by examining tens of thousands of documents, including drug tests, disciplinary records, docs' emails, contracts, policies, and manufacturer specifications, and by listening to dozens of hours of recorded disciplinary hearings. I am so proud of the efforts of this team and the fact that DOCS has implemented each and every one of the recommendations suggested by this report. It is now my honor to introduce Karen Murtaugh from Prisoner Legal Services of New York. Karen.
Thank you, Inspector Lang. Good morning. My name is Karen Murtaugh, and I am the Executive Director of Prisoners Legal Services of New York. First, I would like to thank you, Inspector Lang, and your entire team for inviting PLS to be here today. For me, today marks an incredibly important day for the rights of all incarcerated individuals, as the abhorrent practice of punishing incarcerated individuals based on false positive drug tests has finally come to an end. Thanks to the Inspector General's thorough investigation, we now know how this all happened, why it happened, and how to stop it from happening again. The IG and the governor, with the issuance of this report, are signaling that all human rights, whether outside or within prison walls, must be protected. The alternative is unacceptable and is the very reason that my organization, Prisoners Legal Services, was funded in the first place 46 years ago after the Attica prison uprising. Incarcerated individuals are part of our society. They are working to put their past behind them and start anew once they are released. Unfortunately, as you have heard here today, DOCS's drug testing program, run by Microgenics, threw roadblock after roadblock in front of countless individuals on their path to reentry. Too often, human rights are violated because they involve individuals for whom those in power assume no one cares or no one is watching. When a contract is put out to bid, or an administrative disciplinary hearing produces an unjust result, there are real human beings affected, and the ripple effect impacts everyone in society. When an incarcerated person spends weeks, months, or even years in solitary confinement because of an utterly unreliable drug test, that is a travesty of justice that harms not only the person confined, but all of us. The harms are real, lasting, and cannot be overstated. The psychological and physical damage caused by solitary confinement, the loss of family visitation, the lack of proper programming, lost work release, and educational opportunities, all of which help combat recidivism, adds to the ledger for which we as a society need to take account. Justice delayed is justice denied. The entire concept of justice only works when it is handed out equally. In this case, hundreds, if not thousands, of people in New York State prisons were wrongfully accused, found guilty, and punished for drug use. This investigation shows that many individuals in correctional facilities were confused as to what was happening and ignored in their own pursuit of justice. It is easy to lose faith in our justice system when something like this happens. We have an obligation in government to ensure the fair administration of justice, and what we are witnessing here today is the fulfillment of that responsibility. The IG and the governor, through the proper exercise of their oversight powers, have produced a report that I hope will begin the process of righting a wrong and also forge a better path forward. I stand with my colleagues here today to call on docs to make sure the necessary checks and balances are put in place to prevent such abuses from ever taking place again. Again, I thank the Inspector General's office for conducting this important investigation and putting forth recommendations to preserve the integrity of the correctional system. I commend Inspector General Lang and her team for shining a spotlight on these important issues, and I look forward to our continued partnership in making New York a more just place for each and every one of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. I'm now pleased to introduce Bianca Tylek from Worth Rises. Bianca.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning. Thank you, Inspector General Lucy Lang, for having us here and for your and your team's work on this investigation. My name is Bianca Tylek, and I am the Executive Director of Worth Rises, a national nonprofit headquartered here in New York, dedicated to ending the exploitation of people touched by our criminal legal system. We first heard about the drug testing crisis in New York State prisons in the summer of 2019, when we began receiving calls and mail from people inside. They were distraught because the consequences of these false positives were serious, unlike anything we can understand and imagine in free society. And so I want to start by applauding the Inspector General for conducting this thorough investigation and for your team's honest report. The Inspector General's investigation uncovered what is a systemic problem throughout New York's correctional infrastructure: for-profit interests undermining and even violating people's civil and human rights. From phone calls to money transfers and now drug tests, many basic services inside our state prisons are managed by exploitative corporations for egregious financial gain. In this case, as was uncovered by this investigation, docs allowed Microgenics, a subsidiary of the publicly traded Thermo Fisher Scientific, to rewrite the state's prison drug testing policy in service of its own bottom line, with catastrophic consequences for New Yorkers. Microgenics drafted a crass policy based on inappropriate case law that it knew would produce false results because it violated the corporation's own instructions. And worse yet, it provided representatives to defend its false results with lies and omissions in hearings in which incarcerated people do not even have the right to representation. As you've already heard from those who have been directly impacted, that have endured these horrific consequences, these false positives led to lost visits with family, expulsion from critical programs, months in solitary confinement, and even delays in parole. How do we put a value on that missed call, or day in solitary torture, or extra day in prison? However we do, docs and Microgenics must be responsible. We're also left wondering in how many other cities, counties, or states is Microgenics operating with similar faults and impacts. We urge other states who may contract with Microgenics to undergo a similar process as the New York Inspector General's office did, to expose any impropriety and protect its residents. But here in New York, we must also go further. We're glad DOCS has dropped Microgenics and will overhaul its policies under the advisement from the Inspector General's office. But it's time all of the state's prison vendors are reviewed for the exploitation of those in DOCS custody. The current investigation revealed clear violations of the state's procurement guidelines and the lack of legal or scientific review for policies. How many other vendor contracts suffer from the same issues? Sadly, what this investigation reveals is that there is far more work to do. For that reason, we applaud the Inspector General for not just shining a light on the failures of DOC's drug testing program, but for also dedicating resources to the ongoing review of DOC's grievances for the first time. We look forward to our continued partnership with the Inspector General's office, and again, thank you and your team.
Thank you, Bianca. You have heard about the hard work that went into this from directly impacted people, from advocates, and from members of our office. And I would be remiss if I didn't also thank Chief Deputy Inspector General Robin Adair for her work shepherding the office over these past 2 years, including this investigation. DOCS and Microgenics Corporation's failures did nothing to address the public health crisis of substance misuse. Indeed, as you heard from Jay, they only exacerbated the challenges of returning home for so many. Punishing Jay for drugs she didn't take and impeding her release hurts us all. And we can't undo what happened to Jay. She'll never be able to go back and experience the birth of the grandchild she missed, who she fortunately is home with today. But we can and we must, as Bianca and Karen said, do better for people who are still incarcerated in New York State. The Office of the State Inspector General is determined to strengthen accountability in our government institutions, including in our prisons. Today, and with thanks to so many people who shared their stories with us, to DOCS for bringing this issue to our attention, and for cooperating fully with our investigation. We've seen significant reforms enacted that represent one step further towards treating all New Yorkers with dignity. The details of both the program failures and our investigation are outlined in the report, which is available through our website and through our new social media channels at New York State IG. Please follow us. And to all New Yorkers, whether you are a state employee with nowhere to turn, a citizen with a complaint of government fraud, or an incarcerated community member, the Office of the Inspector General is here to hear your concerns and to investigate. Complaints can be made through ig.ny.gov, by phone, by fax, if you still have that, or through our social media at New York State IG. We look forward to working with you, all of you, for a government that prioritizes transparency and integrity. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. For folks who are listening remotely, we do not have the capability to take your questions in real time, so I invite you to submit your questions by email to ig.press@ig.ny.gov, and we will certainly respond by the end of the day. Karen.
I have a question. You said the problem's essentially already been fixed and the contract with Microgenics has been canceled. So what I'm wondering is anybody going to be punished or held accountable for this? Like, for instance, the acting commissioner of DOCS or some of his deputies?
There are currently a number of lawsuits pending, including with the state attorney general.
And so the lawsuits would be on behalf of the prisoners?
There are a whole variety of ongoing lawsuits, including one in the Eastern District of New York that Prisoner Legal Services of New York is handling on behalf of the prisoners.
But there's nothing the state can do right now to, like, you said you can't really give back the time for those prisoners, but to give them back something from what they lost.
The Civil lawsuits are pending, and the investigation speaks for itself. As mentioned, DOCS has complied with the recommendations that were made from a policy perspective in the report. And as to additional ongoing investigations and potential accountability, I can't comment on other offices' matters.
Just to be clear, nobody at DOCS lost their job over this.
I'm going to ask you to hold on one moment and get confirmation from my colleague, George Franey.
An associate commissioner separated during the pendency of our investigation.
Thank you. Karen, I'm told that an associate commissioner did separate from DOCS during the pendency of the investigation.
And we can have their name? So is it?
Named in the report.
Is it named in the report?
Is named in the report.
Cool, thank you.
Is that Bernadette behind the mask?
Hi, I'm Kate.
Oh, hi,
Exeter
Kate.
Elementary.
Oh, hello.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You too.
So I have a couple questions. Do you know why DOCS started using this kind of testing in the first place, and what was done before this kind of screening?
I'm going to ask my colleague George Franey to join me at the podium and answer that question.
Sure. From our testimony that we received during the pendency of the investigation, Microgenics was acquired presumably as a cost-saving measure, but also to search for other drugs that they had not been searching for using a prior vendor. So there were multiple of reasons that they provided to us.
So then that type of, the substance you talked about, like that it tested falsely positive for, were they testing for that substance before this? So this
Sure.
was the first time they were kind of testing for it?
Correct. The substance you mentioned is buprenorphine. They had not tested for that under the prior vendor, and they had acquired those tests under Microgenics.
Yes, sir.
Hi. So had there been a complaint or a report by the union for the corrections officers about problems with the drug tests? I seem to recall there was some issue that NYSCOPA, perhaps Karen Murtaugh is aware of that, but I thought that the corrections officers had really made an issue out of the false positives within maybe a year, 2 years ago.
If I recall correctly, what you're speaking about, that is something that may have been done in response to actions taken by DOC's executive management in response during these allegations. It is not something that we can comment on, as that is not a report that our office has put out.
Okay, and then doesn't DOCS have its own, I'm not sure if it's an inspector general or internal affairs that is supposed to stay on top of these kind of things, but they're all working for the same commissioner, so it's a bit like the fox guarding the hen house. But were they doing anything about this at all? The
Sure.
internal affairs at DOCS?
Sure. They're known as the Office of Special Investigations within DOCS, and they were cooperative with our investigation, and they were the ones who referred that to our office.
Okay, so they were looking into this prior to you folks getting on top of it?
I think once they had become aware of it and they realized the gravity of it, they had referred it to our office appropriately.
Okay, thanks.
When it comes to the reason why the tests were misused in this way, in your assessment, if you can make one, is this malice, ineptitude, laziness, or something else?
This report really speaks for itself as a perfect storm of a series of bad decisions and sometimes accidents that led to really catastrophic results that traumatized many New Yorkers.
Also, in your opinion, are there any loopholes legislatively that need to be shored up to prevent misuse of not even just drug-related issues, but outside of that as far as accountability goes?
Our office doesn't comment on pending legislation, but any step closer towards ensuring that there is transparency into disciplinary processes in DOCS is to the good.
Also, when it comes to the cost-saving measure, it seems like there could potentially be an incentive to not follow up with the more accurate test for cost reasons. I'm assuming, is that in the report as well?
Yeah. Yes.
So what tests are they using now? Did they replace Microgenics with a different kind of test that would hopefully have a better track record?
They have, and they have also adopted the internal training as recommended in our report to ensure that testing officers are trained to follow the protocols that manufacturers require, including secondary confirmatory testing.
Yes, ma'am. You mentioned that you wanted to change the policy for what happens when someone does come up with a positive result. What is that change now? Is there no longer punishment?
Thereafter, there's a confirmatory of a defined positive. There can be a disciplinary response, but it no longer includes solitary confinement.
Yes, curious, the report does mention several times that docs appear to violate or could have violated state finance law and how it put this in place. So what consequences will the agency, I guess, get for that? And then where does that come from, if there will be any?
As mentioned, the report has been referred to all of the relevant agencies, and we can't comment on the actions of other agencies.
So, but I mean, like when a state, I guess, agency gets it, because that would be outside of a lawsuit, I guess, right? Which office would handle doing that if it's not yours? Is that the state attorney general?
This matter has been referred to the state attorney general.
Thank you.
And just so I have audio of it, when it comes to the other recommendations that you made for docs, what were maybe the top 3?
Changing the vendor, ensuring secondary confirmatory testing, training the officials who administer the tests, and ending the use of solitary confinement as a response to positive drug tests were amongst the recommendations in our report that had been adopted by docs as a result of this investigation.
Do you see this rising to criminal charges potentially? I know it's not your office that would adjudicate that, but is it possible that this is just faith in a bad product versus criminal?
The report speaks for itself and has been referred to the appropriate agencies for response.
So with regard to drugs getting into prison, this has been a problem. Contraband gets in despite all the safeguards. Is there anything that this investigation shows as to what could be done better to keep drugs from getting into these facilities? And again, I would ask Karen if you wanted to join in on that one, because you've been around for such a long time with these prison facilities. But the corrections officers have made some, they have some ideas, but these packages are still getting in. People bring them in on their person. I know this, this is just a question aside from this whole thing, but it would seem that everybody would be better off, including those who are incarcerated, if drugs don't get in.
Karen, would you like to respond?
Other than to say I absolutely... Other than to say I absolutely agree with you, it would be good to implement whatever policies we could to prevent the introduction of drugs into prisons. I think it's probably impossible to prevent it altogether, but I know that DOCS now has drug-sniffing dogs that they use at numerous facilities that everybody is subjected to. Even if I go to the prison, they will use the dogs if they're there. They do screen packages when they come in. Drugs come in all sorts of ways. They come in through family members and they come in through staff. So, better searches at the front gate of everyone would probably be another way to stop it, but I don't know that you can ever totally prevent drugs from getting into a prison.
And without commenting on pending matters, I will tell you that of the upwards of 3,000 complaints that our office receives annually, more than half of them come from the Department of Corrections, and we are directing resources towards addressing those complaints as proactively as possible, particularly where we identify patterns and issues of concern.
Geographically, how widespread was the misuse?
Statewide.
Do you know how much docs was saying that they would save by using this kind of testing, the cost savings?
It's outlined in the report, so I'll refer you there.
Was there any retaliation against individuals who complained about the false positive before Docs was aware that it was a false positive? Did people who made an issue out of this get retaliated against?
It is described in the report how people who brought the issue up during disciplinary hearings or even parole hearings were chastised for it, and their concerns were dismissed. Well, thank you all so much for being with us this morning. May the new year bring an increased era of transparency and integrity across New York State. I thank our partners in government, our partners at the press, and above all, the public for working with us to get here. Thank you, Karen, Bianca, and Jay and Elle. Thank you for allowing me to share some small part of your story.